The bus dropped me off at a dusty crossroads 2 miles from the ranch. The air was heavy with sun and silence, the kind that presses on your skin and makes you wonder if you've already made a mistake. My duffel bag felt lighter than my hopes. I had $23 left, no family waiting, and a promise that there was honest work out here if I could stand the heat from the ridge. I could already see the spread of the Double R Ranch. Acres of parched grass that rolled toward the horizon, fences cutting long shadows over the dirt, and a main house standing proud like it knew who owned every inch of land around it. Horses stamped at the posts, cattle grazed near the riverbed, and the smell of dust mixed with leather and sweat. When I reached the gate, a man in a straw hat pointed me toward the bunkhouse. "You the new hand?" he asked, wiping his forehead with a rag. "Yeah, name's Eli," I said. He gave a short nod. "Boss'll see you after supper. Don't be late, he hates late." Inside the bunkhouse, the air was thick with the smell of soap, tobacco, and tired men. Boots lined the wall like obedient soldiers. Most of them didn't look up when I came in except one. A tall rancher with sun-cracked skin and eyes too sharp to ignore. He sat on his cot, rolling a cigarette, the flame reflecting in his gaze. "You knew?" he asked, the smoke curling slow between us. "Just got off the bus." He smirked. "Then you'll be hearing about the rule soon enough." I frowned, setting my duffel down. "What rule?" He shrugged. "Boss's way of testing loyalty, I guess. Every new man spends a night in his cabin before starting real work. Calls it basic training." Laughter broke out from a few bunks nearby, low, knowing chuckles that didn't reach their eyes. I thought they were joking until the man with the cigarette said, almost kindly, "You'll see. Don't take it personal. It's how things are here." I didn't say anything. My throat went dry, not from the dust this time. I'd heard stories about rough places, about men with too much power and no one to stop them. But I hadn't come all this way to sell my dignity for a job. Supper was stew and cornbread, served outside under the fading orange sky. That's when I first saw him. The cowboy boss. He was older than I expected, maybe in his 40s, built like the land itself. Weathered, broad-shouldered, with a calm that came from knowing no one dared challenge him. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, tan skin lined by years in the sun, and when he looked at a man, it felt like he could see every secret tucked behind your ribs. He stood at the end of the table, silent while everyone ate. The others avoided his gaze. I understood why. There was power in that stillness. He didn't need to raise his voice to command it. After the meal, one of the older ranch hands, a wiry man named Tate, leaned toward me. "You'll go see him tonight," he muttered. "Best not to argue. Folks who refuse don't last long here." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. "What happens if I say no?" He looked down at his plate. "Then you'll wish you hadn't come." When the sun slipped away and the lamps flickered on, the boss called out, "New hand, come to my cabin." His tone was quiet, but it carried like a whip through the air. The others turned away. I followed the path to his cabin, the gravel crunching under my boots, my heartbeat louder than the crickets. The cabin stood apart from the rest, neat porch, lantern light glowing through a half-open door. He was waiting inside, arms crossed. "You're Eli," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir. You know the rule." "I've heard about it." He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Then you understand what I expect." I stood taller, my hands trembling behind my back. "With respect, sir. I came here to work, not for whatever this is supposed to be." Silence, the kind that makes every breath dangerous. Then he stepped closer, boots heavy on the wooden floor. His eyes met mine, steady, like a man measuring a storm. "You got spirit," he said finally. "Most don't." "Guess I'm not most," I replied, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. A small smile ghosted across his lips. Not amusement, but something like curiosity. He turned, poured himself a drink, and said without looking back, "Then you'll work for every dollar you get." He nodded toward the door, dismissing me. Outside, the night was colder than I expected. I could still feel his gaze burning between my shoulders as I walked away. The bunkhouse lights glowed in the distance, and laughter drifted through the window. The kind that belonged to men who knew the rules and followed them. When I entered, the room fell quiet for a second. Then Tate muttered, "So, you go through with it?" "No," I said flatly, tossing my bag on the cot that he whistled low. Then may God help you, boy. I didn't answer. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dirt floor, feeling the mix of fear and stubborn pride churning in my chest. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled that I lay down that night knowing I'd made an enemy, but maybe also, unknowingly, earned a kind of respect I didn't yet understand. Tomorrow, I'd learn what working for every dollar really meant. The next morning, the sun rose mean and merciless, already burning through the thin layer of cool night air. By the time I buttoned my shirt and stepped outside, I could tell the day wasn't going to show mercy either. Tate met me near the corral, his hat tipped low, chewing a straw between his teeth. Boss said you're on stall duty, he muttered. All of them? I asked. He gave me a look that said more than words ever could. Every single one. So that's how it started, my punishment in the dust. The stalls stretched like a long hallway of sweat and stench. Shoveling muck under the morning sun was bad enough. But when noon hit, the air turned heavy with the smell of manure, hay, and heat. Sweat pooled down my back until the fabric clung like a second skin. My hands blistered within hours, but I kept going. Now and then. A few of the ranch hands walked by, some nodding quietly, others smirking like I'd brought it on myself. A younger worker named Cody, barely out of his teens, tossed me a glance and whispered, "Should have just gone to his cabin, man. It's easier." I didn't bother replying. The taste of pride was dry in my mouth, but it was all I had left. By mid-afternoon, the boss appeared. He rode in on his chestnut mare, slow and calm, reins loose in one hand. His eyes scanned the field, then landed on me. He didn't say a word, just sat there, silent, watching while I hauled another wheelbarrow of filth across the yard. The weight nearly tipped, my arms trembling, but I gritted my teeth and pushed through. The wheel creaked, mud sloshed, and somewhere behind me, I swore I heard the faintest sound. Not laughter, not mockery, but something like quiet approval. Then he turned his horse and left without a word. That became the rhythm of my days. Sweat, silence, and the feeling of eyes always on me. When I wasn't cleaning stalls, I was hauling feed or fixing fences miles from the others. The sun hammered down until my vision blurred, but I refused to stop before sunset at night. My hands were raw, my muscles burned, and my body ached from head to heel. But I never complained. I'd lie in my bunk listening to the others laugh, whisper, or snore, while I stared at the rafters above me, thinking, he's waiting for me to break. He wants me to crawl to him, but I won't. The next week, I was sent to mend fences on the far side of the ranch, alone. The wire had snapped after a storm, and the ground was rough, dry, full of cactus roots. The sky was so wide it felt like a punishment in itself. The work was grueling. I lifted wooden posts, hammered nails, and stretched barbed wire until my palms tore open. The sun cooked the skin on my neck, and my shirt stuck to my chest, soaked through. When I tripped over a broken post, I hit the dirt hard enough to knock the breath out of me. Blood dripped from my knuckles, dust clinging to the cuts. For a long moment, I just lay there, chest heaving, staring up at the blinding sky. My whole body screamed to quit. I could have packed up and walked to the highway, maybe found another ranch, another chance. But that would mean he'd won. And I wasn't raised to hand over my pride, so I stood, spat the grit from my mouth, and kept working. One nail after another, one post at a time. The sun dipped lower, and the air shimmered gold. That's when I saw him again, the cowboy boss. He rode up quietly, reins slack, horse breathing steady. He didn't say a word, didn't dismount, just watched me from under that wide-brimmed hat, his face half in shadow. For a second, I thought he'd come to mock me, to tell me I'd finally earned the right to beg. But instead, he leaned over, reached into his saddlebag, and dropped something near the fence post before turning his horse. When the dust settled, I saw it. A bottle of water, cool enough that condensation still beaded on the plastic. That I stared at it like it was some kind of trick. The man who'd sent me here to suffer had just left me water. No note, no words, no smirk. Just the bottle. For a long while, I didn't touch it. My pride and my thirst wrestled it out in silence. Then the wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of cedar from the hills, and I finally gave in. I twisted the cap, drank deep, and let the cold hit my throat like mercy. He was already gone. A trail of dust fading into the horizon. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying that small act over and over. The way he hadn't looked angry or proud, just distant. Maybe even tired. I wondered what kind of man built his authority on fear and yet still cared enough to leave water for the one man who defied him. The next morning, I noticed the others looking at me differently. Not kindly, not yet, but with a kind of wary respect. Cody offered a nod when I passed. Tate said nothing, but when I sat for breakfast, he pushed half his biscuit across the table without comment. Small things, but they meant something. The boss didn't speak to me for days after that. But every so often, I'd catch him watching from the porch. Not in judgment, not in anger, just watching. Each day I kept working harder, trying to drown the ache with effort, trying to turn humiliation into something solid. My hands toughened. My back grew stronger. I began to see the shape of the ranch differently, not as a prison, but as a place that would yield only to grit. And maybe that's what he wanted to see all along. Or maybe he didn't know what he'd created when he tried to punish me. Either way, I wasn't the same man who'd stepped off that bus. When the sun finally set on my 12th day of punishment, I leaned against the fence, hands torn and bleeding again, but my heart steady. The prairie glowed with the last light, wind whistling through the grass like a hymn for the stubborn. I whispered to no one. To the land, to him, maybe even to myself. If he thought he could break me, he didn't know who I was. The days bled into each other. Sunrises that looked the same, blisters that healed just in time to tear again. Dust that never left my skin no matter how hard I scrubbed. Somewhere in that repetition, the pain turned into rhythm. I stopped noticing how much it hurt. I just worked. Weeks passed, and the looks from the other hands started to change. The laughter faded, replaced by nods, sometimes even a quick smile. Cody began handing me tools without being asked. Tate, the quiet old-timer who'd first warned me, started splitting his tobacco with me after long shifts. That was his way of saying, "You've earned your place." I didn't realize how much things had shifted until one morning the foreman, Hank, stopped beside me while I was loading bales onto the flatbed. He watched a while, arms crossed, then said, "You've got grit, kid. Not many last a month under him." "Guess I'm too stubborn to quit," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He chuckled, low and rough. "Stubborn's good. Makes a man worth keeping." When the cowboy boss came by later, Hank called out to him, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Boss, this one's got fire. Works harder than two men." The boss, Rhett, I'd overheard someone call him once, slowed his horse and looked at me. His expression didn't change much, but something flickered in his eyes. A moment later, he gave a small nod. That was all. But in a place where approval was rarer than rain, it felt like a medal. After that, my punishment duties were over. I started getting real work, driving cattle, repairing corrals, even handling one of the younger stallions no one else wanted to go near. I didn't ask why the change happened. Maybe he'd decided I'd proven myself. Or maybe he'd just grown tired of trying to break me. Either way, things between us began to shift in ways I couldn't name. He didn't bark orders at me anymore. Instead, he'd approach with quiet authority. Say something like, "Fence by the north pasture's sagging. Think you can fix it before dusk?" His tone wasn't soft, but it wasn't sharp either. It was respectful. And I found myself answering with the same calmness I once used as armor. "I can handle it." He'd glance over, like he was weighing my words. "I know you can." That small exchange would linger with me all day, echoing louder than any insult ever could. There were other moments too. Subtle, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. One afternoon, while we checked the herd together, he asked, "You from the city?" I nodded. "Left a while ago. Needed a clean start." He grunted. "City boys don't usually last this long out here." "Guess I'm not most city boys," I said, echoing the words I'd thrown at him that first night. For a split second, I caught it. The corner of his mouth curving just enough to be called a smile. We rode side by side for hours that day, barely speaking, but the silence felt different. Not tense, not cold, just quiet, like we both needed the space but didn't mind sharing it. Over time, I began to see him differently. Beneath the hardened shell, there was something else, a kind of weariness that didn't come from work alone. The other men called him ruthless, but I started to think what they saw as cruelty was something closer to armor. Once, late in the evening, I caught him standing by the fence, staring out at the horizon long after everyone else had gone in. His hand rested on the rail, his thumb tracing the weathered wood like it held memories only he could read. For the first time, I wondered if loneliness was the real reason behind his rule. Maybe power was just the only language he'd learned to speak. Still, I couldn't forget what he'd done or tried to do. That tension lived under my skin, hot and confusing. Every time I started to soften, I'd remember the humiliation of that first night, and something in me would tighten again. But it was getting harder to hold on to pure resentment when the man in front of me wasn't the monster I'd imagined one morning. He joined me fixing the East Corral. No warning, no order. He just walked up, gloves in hand, and started working beside me. "Didn't think this job needed supervision?" I said, trying to sound casual. "It doesn't," he replied, hammering a nail into the post. "Just figured 2 hands are faster than 1. We worked in silence. The sound of hammering and creaking would filling the gaps between us. The air was heavy, and storm clouds gathered on the edge of the plain, crawling closer with each strike of thunder. When the rain came, it came fast, sharp, sudden, soaking through in seconds. The dirt turned to mud under our boots, thunder rolled like cannon fire, and still we kept working, side by side, neither willing to stop at one point. The wind tore my hat off. It tumbled across the pasture until he caught it, grabbing it midair before it could disappear. He handed it back, his hand brushing mine. Rough skin against rough skin. The touch lasted less than a second, but it left an echo that lingered in the downpour. "You're stubborn as hell," he said, half shouting over the rain. "Learned it from someone." I shot back that he laughed then, an honest, deep sound that startled me. It wasn't the boss's laugh. It was a man's laugh, real, raw, human that we finished the job drenched to the bone. Both of us covered in mud and rain. The last post stood straight, the wire tight, water streaming down our faces. He looked at me, chest rising and falling, and for once, there was no command in his eyes, just something quieter, something like recognition. The others were running for cover, shouting and laughing, but we stayed there, standing in the middle of the storm. "Finally," he said, softer this time, "you didn't have to prove anything to me." I met his gaze. "Wasn't proving it to you." He nodded once, not offended, not surprised, just accepting. Like he finally understood. Lightning flashed, the sky split open, and in that raw light, I saw him for what he really was. Not a tyrant, not a test I had to survive, but a man who'd built his world on rules because he didn't know how else to protect himself. And for reasons I didn't want to examine, my chest ached for him that we stood there a while longer, rain drumming on our hats, water streaming down our faces, until words felt unnecessary. There was a strange peace in that silence. Not friendship, not forgiveness, but the space in between where both could grow. When we finally walked back toward the ranch, he didn't lead, and I didn't follow. That we just walked, side by side, the storm easing behind us. That night, as thunder echoed far away and the bunkhouse lights dimmed, I realized something had shifted for good. The resentment I'd carried like a weapon had started to dull, and in its place, something unfamiliar had taken root. A quiet, reluctant admiration for the man who once tried to break me, and who, without meaning to, had begun to teach me what strength really looked like. The storm didn't roll in this time. It attacked, thunder cracked like rifle fire across the plains, and the wind tore through the ranch with the fury of a freight train. Sheets of rain fell sideways, drowning the land in seconds. From the bunkhouse window, I saw the barn roof buckle, then rip apart like paper. "Get the horses!" I shouted, already pulling on my jacket. The others scrambled, half-dressed, boots sliding in the mud. Tate yelled something I couldn't hear over the wind. By the time we reached the corral, chaos had taken over. Fences had splintered. Cattle bellowed in panic, kicking and thrashing against the gates. Lightning flashed, white and violent, and for a heartbeat, I saw him, the cowboy boss, out there alone, trying to tie down a section of roofing with one arm while gripping a post with the other. "Boss!" I yelled, running toward him, but the wind swallowed my voice. A crack of thunder split the sky. The next moment, he was gone, buried under the collapse of the smaller feed shed. "Rhett!" I shouted his name before I even realized I'd said it. The men froze for a second, then moved. We tore through the debris, rain stinging our faces. I found his arm first, still warm, still moving. Together, we dragged him free. His leg was bleeding badly, twisted under him, his shirt torn open from the fall. He was breathing, but pale. "Get him to his cabin," I ordered, voice hard as the rain. For once, no one argued. Tate and I half-carried him, mud up to our knees, lightning still exploding above us. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of cedar, whiskey, and storm. It was my first time stepping into that place, the room that once stood for everything I despised. Now it was just the room where a man was bleeding out on the floor. "Hold still," I said, grabbing towels from a shelf and wrapping them around his leg. Blood seeped through instantly. "You've got a deep gash, might need stitches." He gritted his teeth, trying to sit up. "Cattle? I already sent Cody to round them up." Hank's checking the barns. "You're not moving." His eyes narrowed, like he wanted to argue, but the pain won. He fell back against the cot, breathing hard. For a long time, the only sound was rain hammering against the roof. I cleaned the wound, hands shaking from adrenaline and the strangeness of it all. The man who once held every ounce of power over me was now depending on me to keep him alive. When I finished tying the bandage, I sat back on my heels. "You're lucky?" I muttered. "Doesn't feel that way," he rasped. The lamplight flickered, throwing gold across his face. The strong jaw now slack with exhaustion, the lines around his eyes deeper than I'd ever noticed. Without the hat, without the posture, he looked human. "You should rest," I said quietly. He chuckled, though it came out more like a groan. "You giving me orders now?" "Looks like it." That earned me a faint smile. It lasted only a second before he grimaced in pain. I stood, poured a glass of water, and held it out. He took it, his hand brushing mine. A small contact, but enough to jolt something inside me I didn't want to name. "Why'd you go out there alone?" I asked finally. "Could have gotten yourself killed." He stared at the wall for a moment. "Habit, I guess. Always figured if I didn't do it myself, it wouldn't get done right. Or maybe you just don't trust anyone else." His gaze flicked to mine, sharp, searching. "Maybe not. Not for a long time." Silence settled between us, thick but not heavy. The storm outside was easing now, but it left its mark. Broken fences, ruined roofs, and this strange stillness between us. He looked down at his leg, then back at me. "You handled the men out there," he said. "Didn't panic. Kept everyone moving." "I did what needed doing." He nodded slowly. "That's what makes a leader." The word hit me harder than I expected. Leader. Not worker. Not boy. After a moment, he said, "You want to know why I did what I did? The rule, the initiation, whatever they call it." I didn't answer. I just waited. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Years back, I had a partner. Ranch hand I trusted more than anyone. We built this place together. Thought of him like a brother." His voice softened, almost breaking. "He sold me out. Took half the herd, the payroll, and 2 men with him. I spent the next year clawing this ranch back from debt and dirt." He looked up then, eyes raw in a way I'd never seen. "After that, I made sure no one got close enough to hurt me again. So I made the rules, harsh ones. Fear keeps men loyal. That's what I told myself." "And did it?" I asked quietly. "For a while," he said. "But it also kept them distant. Guess I forgot what respect looked like without fear." I let the words sink in. All those weeks, I'd built him up in my head as a tyrant. But now, hearing the truth, all I could see was a man trying too hard not to be broken again. He leaned back, exhausted. "You were supposed to quit, you know, when I sent you to the muck stalls. I figured you'd leave by the 3rd day. Guess I disappointed you." He gave a faint laugh. "No, you surprised me. For the first time, I didn't see a boss or an enemy sitting there. Just a man who'd carried his power like armor, and now sat stripped of it, vulnerable, bleeding human." "You don't have to keep carrying it alone," I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me, really looked, and something flickered in his expression. Confusion, gratitude, maybe even something deeper. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Why do you care?" I swallowed, unsure how to answer. "Because I've been where you are," I said finally. "When you build walls so high you forget what it feels like to have someone on the other side." The words hung between us, heavy with everything we weren't saying. Outside, the storm's rage faded into the hush of dripping eaves. Inside, the lamp cast a soft glow over him. his shirt half unbuttoned, skin pale from pain, eyes searching mine with quiet intensity as he reached out, just slightly, like he wanted to touch my wrist but stopped himself halfway. You ever think maybe I deserved someone to stand up to me? I nodded. Maybe you just needed someone who wouldn't walk away. Our eyes met and held. For a long, unguarded moment, there was nothing but the sound of our breathing and the low hum of rain. His gaze dropped to my mouth, then back to my eyes that I felt the pull, quiet, magnetic, dangerous. The same tension that had been building for weeks finally showing its shape in the flickering light. But neither of us moved. Not yet. That he exhaled slowly, breaking the silence. You should go. I'll be fine. I stood, hesitating near the door. I'll check on you in the morning. As I stepped out into the damp night air, I caught my reflection in the cabin window. Wet hair plastered to my forehead, dirt streaked down my arms, and something new in my eyes I couldn't name behind me. His shadow shifted by the lamplight, still watching, and as the door shut between us, I realized the balance had changed for good. Power didn't matter anymore. Now, he needed me, and that changed everything. Rhett's recovery took weeks. The gash on his leg healed slower than he'd admit, and the limp stayed longer than he liked. But during that time, something else healed between us too. Quietly, without either of us naming it first, I helped him out of obligation. I brought food from the kitchen, handled his share of the morning work, checked his bandages before heading out. He didn't thank me often, but when he did, it wasn't in words. It was in the way his eyes softened, or how he stopped giving orders and started making requests. The ranch somehow ran smoother than ever. The men listened when I spoke. Tate joked that maybe I was the boss now, and Rhett didn't correct him. If anything, he seemed content to let me steer things. One evening, I found him sitting on the porch, Kane resting beside him, staring at the sunset bleeding across the horizon. The sky was streaked in red and gold, the land glowing like it was on fire. You're walking better, I said, setting down a mug of coffee beside him. He smirked. I'd walk faster if you'd stop checking on me like an old nurse. I leaned against the railing. If you'd stop pretending you're indestructible, I'd stop. He chuckled, that low, rich sound that always caught me off guard. Fair enough. For a while, we watched the sky fade to blue. The cicadas started their evening song, and a soft breeze carried the scent of grass and rain. It was peaceful. Too peaceful for what I felt brewing inside me. He glanced at me then, his voice quiet. You've done more for this ranch than anyone ever did for me. The words caught me off guard. I just did my job. He shook his head slowly. No, you brought life back to this place. To me, maybe. I looked away, pretending to watch the horizon. Funny, I said. I used to dream about leaving this place. Why didn't you? I hesitated, the truth heavy on my tongue. Because somewhere along the way I stopped hating it. Stopped hating you. He didn't respond right away. I felt his gaze on me. Steady, unreadable. When I finally looked back, his eyes were softer than I'd ever seen. That's a dangerous thing to admit, he said quietly. I know. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged with gratitude, guilt, maybe even something like affection neither of us was ready to name. Days bled into nights, and our routines began to intertwine. We started sharing meals, at first out of convenience, then by unspoken choice. The bunkhouse felt too loud, too far removed from the quiet rhythm we'd built together. He'd cook sometimes, clumsy but proud, and I'd tease him when he burned the biscuits. He'd fire back with dry humor, calling me Farmhand, like it was still a game between us. But the edge was gone, replaced by warmth. That I started noticing the small things. The way his hand lingered near mine when passing a plate, how his laugh came easier now, how he sometimes looked at me like he was trying to remember something he'd forgotten years ago, how to trust someone. And I was losing my balance. Each time he stood too close, every time his voice dropped to that soft drawl, I felt the walls inside me shake. I told myself it was respect or friendship or just habit. But deep down, I knew better. One night, the wind howled through the valley, carrying the chill of late autumn. The power flickered, so I built a fire in the hearth of his cabin. The flames painted the room in gold and shadow, dancing against the walls. Rhett sat in his armchair, his leg propped up, a glass of whiskey resting loosely in his hand. Never thought I'd see you comfortable in here, he said. watching me toss another log into the fire. "I wouldn't call it comfortable," I said, half smiling. "Just warmer than the bunkhouse." He chuckled. "You've got that stubborn streak even now. Guess you rubbed off on me." His eyes met mine across the room. The firelight flickered between us, soft, intimate. "You still think I'm the villain in your story?" he asked suddenly. That I exhaled slowly. "I don't think you were ever the villain. Maybe just a man who didn't know how to ask for what he really wanted." He studied me for a long time, his expression unreadable. "And what do you think I wanted?" I shrugged. "Loyalty, control, maybe connection, but on your terms." He smiled faintly, but there was sadness in it. "You're not wrong." He paused, swirling the drink in his hand. "It's strange. You defied me, humiliated me in front of my own men, and yet I find myself grateful for it." I looked into the fire, not trusting my voice. "Because I stayed? Because you reminded me who I used to be before all this." For a while, neither of us spoke. The fire popped softly, throwing sparks into the air. When I turned toward him again, his gaze hadn't moved from me. He said quietly, "You ever wish things had started differently between us?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But maybe it had to happen the way it did. Otherwise, I might have never seen the man you really are." Something shifted in his expression then, a flicker of emotion too deep for words. He set the glass down and leaned forward slightly, his hand resting on the arm of the chair closest to me, and I felt the distance between us shrink without thinking. I knelt beside the fire to poke at the logs, just to have something to do with my hands. But when I straightened up, his fingers brushed my forearm, barely, like a question. The touch was warm, hesitant. I should have pulled back, but I didn't. His thumb traced a faint line on my sleeve before retreating, almost as if he regretted it. Our eyes met, and time seemed to slow. There was no anger, no tension, just quiet understanding, something raw and fragile building in the space between us. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he doesn't think he deserves. "You changed everything here," he whispered. That I swallowed hard, my pulse loud in my ears. "So did you." For a heartbeat, we leaned closer, drawn by something neither of us wanted to name. The air between us was charged, the firelight painting his face in gold and shadow. I could feel the warmth of his breath, the faint tremor in mine. But then he blinked, leaning back just slightly, breaking the spell. "You should get some rest," he said, voice rougher than before. I nodded, standing too quickly. "Yeah, early day tomorrow." As I reached for the door, I felt his gaze following me. It lingered, heavy and unspoken, all the way to the threshold. Outside, the night was clear and endless, stars spilling across the sky. I looked back once, saw him still by the fire, hand resting on the arm of the chair where mine had been. The distance between us wasn't measured in steps anymore. It was something smaller, more dangerous. One look, one breath, one heartbeat away from breaking. And as I walked back toward the bunkhouse, the cold air did nothing to cool what had started burning inside me. Pride said walk away. Desire whispered you already didn't. By the time spring came around, the ranch looked reborn. The fields were greener than I'd ever seen, the fences straight, the herd strong and steady. But it wasn't just the land that had changed. The people had too. Rhett walked without the cane now, though a faint limp lingered like a reminder of everything we'd both survived. The men respected him more these days, but not out of fear. When he spoke, they listened, not because they were afraid of being punished, but because they trusted him. And somehow, somewhere along the way, he'd started trusting me. I wasn't the new hand anymore. I was foreman now, co-managing, though neither of us said it that way. He still signed the paychecks, but decisions passed through me first. It wasn't a title he gave. It was a place I'd earned. Most mornings we worked side by side, less boss and worker now, more like partners in rhythm. When he barked instructions, I'd counter with suggestions. When I took charge, he didn't interfere. We argued sometimes, sure, usually over small things like which fields to seed first or whether to buy a new truck. But the arguments ended in laughter, not distance. The rest of the crew noticed. Tate started calling us the two heads of one stubborn mule. Rhett just smirked and said, "Well, at least it gets the job done." It was strange how natural it all felt, this balance that once seemed impossible. The ranch that had once felt like a battlefield now felt like a heartbeat. One evening, after a long day of mending irrigation lines, Rhett called me into his cabin. The door was open, the firelight warm against the fading dusk. I hesitated a moment on the porch, remembering what that threshold used to mean: fear, defiance, humiliation. Now it was just a door. "Come in," he said without looking up from the ledger. "You'll catch cold standing there." I stepped inside, dust still clinging to my boots. "Everything all right?" He closed the book and leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, more than all right." Something in his tone made me pause. He motioned toward the chair opposite his desk. "Sit." I did, watching him carefully. The silence between us stretched. Not tense, just full. Finally, he spoke. "I ended it," he said. "Ended what?" "The rule." His voice was low, but steady. "Told the men this morning. No more cabin nonsense. No more tests. It's done." For a second, I didn't know what to say. The words hung heavy in the air, like the end of a long storm. "What made you decide that?" I asked quietly. He gave a small, tired smile. "You did." That caught me off guard. "I spent years convincing myself that fear built loyalty," he continued. "But it never did. All it built was distance. Men followed because they were afraid to walk away, not because they believed in me. I thought that's what leadership meant." He looked down at his hands, calloused, scarred, still rough even after all these years. "Then you came along. You didn't follow. You didn't break. You didn't give me what I thought I wanted, and somehow that gave me what I actually needed." I exhaled slowly. "Respect. Truth," he said, "and a reminder that I wasn't untouchable." For a moment, the only sound was the fire cracking softly between us. Then he looked up again, his eyes meeting mine. "I'm proud of you, Eli," he said simply. "Prouder than I can ever say." Something inside me shifted at those words. The same man who once punished me for defiance was now thanking me for it. I swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. "I didn't do all this to change you," I said finally. "I just wanted to survive it." He nodded slowly. "And you did more than that." He stood then, walked toward the window, and rested his hand on the frame, watching the last traces of daylight fade. "You know," he said, "I used to think the only way to keep this place standing was to stay hard, to never let anyone close enough to see how afraid I was of losing it. Afraid. Of everything," he admitted. "Of betrayal. Of weakness. Of needing anyone again." He turned, and the firelight hit his face. Softer now, lined with honesty instead of pride. "But the truth is, I needed this place. And I needed someone who'd see it for what it could be, not what I made it." I stood too, the weight of his words pressing against my chest. "You built this ranch from nothing," I said. "You don't owe anyone an apology for wanting to protect it." He shook his head. "Maybe not. But I owe you one for what I put you through." The room felt smaller suddenly, full of warmth and something unspoken. I met his eyes, searching for the right response, but all that came out was, "You don't have to say that." He took a step closer. "I do." The fire popped softly, throwing sparks across the floor. His voice lowered, rough with emotion. "When you refused me that night, I thought you were challenging my authority. But really, you were saving me from my own damn loneliness." I felt my throat tighten. "You don't owe me anything, Rhett." He smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But I want you to know something." He hesitated, then said it quietly, like he was testing the words for the first time. "I fell for your strength, not your obedience, not your fear. The part of you that never let me win the wrong way." The words landed between us like an open door I wasn't ready to walk through. And yet, I already had. I took a step closer, close enough to smell the faint scent of whiskey and cedar. "You're not the only one who changed," I said softly. "I used to think this place was just a stop along the way, a job to get me through. But somewhere between hating you and understanding you, it became home." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then something broke through. Relief, maybe, or tenderness. "Home," he repeated, like the word itself was new to him. For a moment, we just stood there. Two men who had spent months fighting the wrong kind of war, now standing in the quiet. After that, he reached out, slowly, and his hand brushed my arm. The same cautious touch from that night by the fire, but different now. Steadier. Honest. "You sure you want to stay here?" he asked. You could have any ranch in the state. I smiled. Maybe I don't want another. Maybe I already found what I was looking for. He laughed softly, shaking his head. You always know what to say to make a man feel small. Or seen, I said. The air between us thickened again. Not the old tension of power and defiance, but something gentler, earned. The kind of closeness that doesn't demand anything, only offers it. That he leaned in slightly, close enough that the warmth of his breath brushed my cheek. You have no idea how much I wanted this. He murmured that I could have said the same thing. Instead, I let my forehead rest lightly against his. The contact was brief, quiet, but full of every word we'd left unspoken for months. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet, just a promise. When I finally stepped back, his eyes followed me, soft with something that looked a lot like peace. Guess we both got what we deserved, I said. He smiled. No, Eli. We got what we earned. The next morning came silver and still. The sky was just beginning to pale when Rhett saddled 2 horses out by the gate. I joined him, and for once, he didn't lead. We rode side by side into the open field, the horizon stretching wide and endless. The grass glistened with dew. The air smelled of wet earth and promise. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The sun crested the ridge behind us, painting the land gold. I looked over and saw him glance my way, a small, content smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He once thought he could buy obedience. But what he got instead was something stronger: respect, love, and maybe, finally, a home.